O centro dos seus pensamentos agora, o que envenenava tudo, era o ódio cada vez mais amargo pela atmosfera do imperialismo em que vivia. Pois à medida que o seu cérebro se desenvolvera, coisa que não se pode impedir e que é uma das tragédias dos semi-educados que o desenvolvem tarde, quando estão já no modo qualquer errado de viver, ele compreenderá a verdade sobre os ingleses e o seu império. O império indiano e um despotismo, sem dúvida benevolente, mas mesmo assim um despotismo, cujo objetivo final é o roubo. Dias da Birmânia, 1934.
Em julho de 1927, Blair, padecendo de uma infecção brônquica, obteve licença para visitar a Inglaterra. Nunca mais regressou à Birmânia. Com 24 anos e desempregado, ficou em casa dos pais em Southwold, uma cidade burguesa, conservadora, na costa de Suffolk, onde viviam muitos ex-funcionários coloniais e as suas famílias.
I remember him very well, but really sort of more to look at, and I mean he was to be in places, but he was very shy, quiet, and you know did sort of become jolly with us all. I think he was thinking of thoughts.
He didn't join in parties, did he?
No.
He had individual friends.
Yes, yes, he was like that.
He used to walk
A lot.
along the River Orwell, especially, which he loved. That's why he took the name Orwell.
And the marshes, he loved everything to do with that kind of thing. And he was always awfully nice, you know, very nice manners, and very quiet, gentle. But, of course, he never looked like an Eton scholar, did he?
No, he looked rather like a tramp always.
His relationship with the black people in Burma, if you like, or the oppressed people of the world, carried over into how he conducted his life when he came back to Britain. I mean, what he thought was, there's all these oppressed people around. He didn't see the oppressed people as having a kind of organized voice, really. He just wanted to join with the oppressed people. So he did extraordinary things, like he became a tramp in London, deliberately became a tramp.
No inverno de 1927, Blair alugou uma cama num albergue decadente do londrino Notting Hill. Passou os 3 anos seguintes em alojamentos semelhantes, quer em Londres, quer na primavera de 1928 em Paris. Aí lutou para ganhar a vida como escritor, oferecendo artigos a revistas e jornais. Mas pouco se vendeu, e não tardou que Blair se encontrasse na miséria. No outono de 1929, aceitou um trabalho de lavador de pratos num hotel fino da Rue de Rivoli. O salário era miserável, mas a experiência forneceu-lhe material para o seu primeiro romance publicado.
He wrote this book, Down and Out, in Paris and London, which nobody bought, but was an extraordinary account of what it was like. And I don't think anyone can ever really go into a French restaurant again with a clear conscience if you've read Down and Out in Paris and London as to what happens in the kitchens and how they treat the food and so on. I mean, French restaurants are meant to be famous, but when you've read all of them, you're very suspicious about all restaurants, especially French restaurants.
Era divertido olhar em redor do nojento lava-loiças e pensar que só uma pequena porta de batentes nos separava da sala de jantar. Ali estavam os clientes, sentados em todo o seu esplendor, toalhas de mesa imaculadas, jarras com flores, espelhos, cornijas douradas e anjos pintados. E aqui, apenas a alguns passos, nós, na nossa nojenta sujidade, porque era realmente nojenta. Não havia tempo para lavar o chão, senão à noite, e escorregávamos numa mistela de água de sabão, folhas de alface, papel rasgado e alimentos pisados. Uma dúzia de empregados de mesa, sem casaco, de axilas suadas, sentavam-se à mesa mexendo salada e enfiando os dedos nos potes de natas. Na penúria, em Paris e Londres, 1933.
Quando o manuscrito de Na Penúria, em Paris e Londres, foi aceito para publicação por Victor Gollancz, em 1933, Blair ofereceu-lhe 3 pseudónimos: George Orwell, Kenneth Miles e H. Lewis Always. O editor escolheu o primeiro. Mas a publicação não lhe trouxe riqueza. Orwell aceitou um emprego em Hampstead e, com isso, criou um círculo de amigos literários.
I met him first in the 4th floor flat of the Westropes, who owned the bookshop at Book Lovers Corner. He was very hard up, and so was I, and we both paid 12 and 6 a week for our room. And when the Westropes suggested that we should work half a day every day for a week, in return for the rent, 12 and 6, it seemed a good enough arrangement because it took the one great worry off our mind.
I used to haunt second-hand bookshops all my life, of course, and I knew Westrops very well. I bought a lot of stuff from it. When I went in one day, I saw this tremendously tall man, you know, and I thought, oh, handy, he can reach all the books that we can't choose. And so we started discussing books, and then he said, would I like to come and meet some of his friends who were also interested in books? So we began to meet quite regularly, you know, and went around together. And used to go for long walks over the heath, which was great fun because he was very knowledgeable about country things. He had a phobia about money. He seemed to want to cut a dash a bit, you know, especially with women. He hated you to offer to go Dutch with him. He thought this was very unmanly sort of thing.
I remember him coming to a cocktail party we gave in the Spanish wartime, and we had quite a lot of right-wing friends, rather nice, jolly girls with lots of money who were unpolitical, and then there were left-wing political people and poets. It was the watershed between the unconscious political generation and the people who were beginning to get engaged in the 30s struggle. And he came along looking gaunt, shaggy, shabby, aloof. And he had this extraordinary magical effect again on these women. They all wanted to meet him and started talking to him, and their sort of fur coats shook with pleasure. They were totally unprepared for anyone like that, and they responded to something. This sort of John the Baptist figure coming in from the wilderness, and suddenly the women feel it doesn't matter what his political views are, he's a wonderful man. And that was rather the effect he had everywhere, I think.
Uma mulher que caiu presa ao encanto de Orwell foi Eileen Maud O'Shaughnessy, uma estudante da Universidade de Londres. Uma semana depois, Orwell propôs-lhe casamento, mas isto implicava dinheiro que Orwell continuava a não ter em abundância. Ele adiou os planos dos dois e concentrou-se num novo romance, a história de um escritor encurralado numa livraria.
Em número de 800, os romances ocupavam a sala em 3 lados até ao teto, prateleira após prateleira, de capas oblongas e vistosas, como se as paredes tivessem sido construídas de tijolos de cores muito diferentes, colocados verticalmente. Gordon olhou-os com um ódio inerte. Nesse momento odiava todos os livros e, acima de tudo, romances. Era horrível pensar em toda aquela tralha bafienta e meio ressequida encafuada num só lugar. Pudim, tresandando a gordura de rins, 800 placas de pudim que o emparedavam, uma cripta de conglomerado de pudim. Vil Metal, 1936.
I was rather critical of the novel because I said it wasn't real, and I was told, well, novels are not supposed to be real. And it became very clear to me that, at that time at least, Orwell was thinking, as he had been talking, in stereotypes. There's no normal person came into the bookshop. There was no joy. The bookshop was rather, I don't know, slightly sordid, slightly depressing, none of which was true.
Mas Orwell não estava a escrever uma biografia. Queria descrever o papel que as sociedades atribuem aos indivíduos, o poder do sistema de classes e a luta do pensamento livre contra a depressão. O seu objetivo era transformar a política em arte.
He discovered, if you like, the labour movement. He discovered it partly through Banks, one of the great publishers of that time, a great socialist publisher who started the Left Book Club in 1936. And the most brilliant thing he did was to commission George Orwell to write a book about the British working class at that time, the condition of the British working class.
A 31 de janeiro de 1936, Orwell partiu para Wigan, continuando depois a viagem para Barnsley e Sheffield. Passou apenas 2 meses no norte da Inglaterra, mas o romance que essa viagem inspirou viria a torná-lo famoso aos 34 anos.
Middleton Murray wanted me to find him lodgings of the worst type, practically of a slum character. So I asked Orwell in, he came in, and he had tea with us.
And I took him in this #1 house we went in. And of course we asked permission, and they knew me, the neighbours liked me. Yeah. Well, his first job, he said, get hold of that tape. He had a tape measure. I said, how we measured it. And when we went into this house, we took all particulars. It reminded me of the detective. He was trying to find that missing link.
Em The Road to Wigan Pier, Orwell alonga-se em todos os pormenores da vida das classes trabalhadoras do Norte, a concepção das casas, a medida das salas, o nível de comodidade. A educação cristã de Orwell não o havia preparado para o que ele ia encontrar.
No dia em que um bacio cheio ficou debaixo da mesa do pequeno almoço, decidi ir-me embora. Aquele sítio começava a deprimir-me. Não era apenas a porcaria, os cheiros e a comida desprezível, mas a sensação de uma decadência estagnante e sem sentido, de ter descido a uma catacumba qualquer onde as pessoas rastejam incessantemente como besouros negros numa infindável confusão de trabalhos sujos e ressentimentos maldosos. The Road to Wigan Pier, 1937.
Se Orwell achava as condições de vida más, as condições de trabalho que os mineiros do Norte tinham de suportar horrorizaram-no.
We rigged him out in helmets and a lamp, and we hadn't gone more than 300 yards when Orwell just didn't duck his head quick enough. Hit him, knocked the helmet off, knocked him down. He was flat out. When we revived him and got him round, and we travelled further in, and the further in we travelled, the lower the roof, and I would think he'd to travel best part of 3/4 of a mile, bent absolutely double. I had to be bent. The working face was, I think, 26 inches, and by the time we landed there, Orwell was unquestionably, he was exhausted. And I remember him lying down on the floor, and I said to him, it's a so-and-so good job. They don't know what you're down here for, to write a book about mining. That should be a fall the roof and bury it.
I think Orwell